we are going to reprise something we've done in the past, which is a town hall conversation about an important topic, in this case, building trust and transparency. Before we do that, I want to thank and recognize our founding partner, Salesforce, for helping us host today's lunch and this town hall program. Much as we think this is the very best event that happens any time over the course of the year, thank you, Alan, that's right. I also want to mention another very good event that I never miss, partly because it closes down all of San Francisco, and that is Salesforce's Dreamforce event in the fall, on November 19th to 22nd. Salesforce and Fortune hopes to see you there. Our town hall this afternoon is going to focus, as I said, on the topic of trust and transparency. The implication there is that there is a lack of trust and a lack of transparency in the world that we're living in now. We've been hitting on these themes over the course of the day and last night. There's a crisis in capitalism. There is a crisis in democracy, in conversations between and among the primary players and leaders in capitalism and democracy. And we want to have a rigorous group conversation about what what you as leaders of the business community ought to be doing about these problems. So let me explain how the next 40 minutes or so are going to run. I'm going to recognize, in order, 3 discussion leaders who, perhaps unlike the rest of us, have given some thought to this topic ahead of time. They're going to stand up and offer some suggestions about how we should discuss this. And then the conversation is yours. I'm going to walk around the room with a mic. I'll have helpers with mics. And we want everybody to feel part of this conversation, to say what you think, to ask questions of other people, to challenge each other. Disagreement is okay too, because that's how we learn and grow. So to kick things off, I once again want to thank Salesforce for hosting this town hall session and recognize Salesforce's Chief Ethical and Humane Use Officer, Paula Goldman, who is joining us today. Paula, please.
Thank you. So as Adam mentioned, we are at a moment of reckoning, not just for tech, but for business as a whole. And the crisis of trust in all institutions is basically at an all-time high. What gives me immense optimism is that we've been here before as a society. We heard this morning about the movement for free secondary education. I want to remind you of a different moment. The introduction of automobiles, commercial automobiles. Imagine what it was like to stand on a dusty street corner in New York in the early 1900s after automobiles were first introduced. People were dying in record numbers on the streets. It was, and I quote this from a historian, more dangerous to try to cross the street than to try to cross the Atlantic in a clamshell boat. And so what happened? You had leaders rise up and say, I think we need a brilliant piece of technology called the stop sign, which took into account, was introduced about 10 years after automobiles came into commercial circulation. Later, we had movements around automobile safety, seatbelts. Today, it's easy to forget that, but today, safety is a competitive advantage in industry. I think we're at a similar moment with regard to how guardrails for tech get created. And here's what the difference is. Tech is moving much faster than we have time to reckon with. But the key to trust is listening, right? We need to be listening to the people within society that have ideas about how tech should be governed and what ethical principles get incorporated. You heard this morning, Mark Benioff mentioned that we had a moment of crisis last year at Salesforce when employees and others were protesting about our contract with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency. We set up this Office of Ethical and Humane Use with a council of both internal and external members. And the key thing that we do when we have difficult issues that we have to grapple with is listen. We bring in civil society leaders. We talk to employees. We talk to customers. And these decisions are not easy. And those conversations don't always have people agreeing. But I want to suggest that the number one thing that we can do as business leaders is set up similar processes whereby we're involving everyone in these decisions, because these decisions definitely affect everyone. And with that, I will end by saying I'm greatly optimistic as well, because we're having this conversation today amongst forward-looking business leaders like yourselves, and I can't wait to hear what we come up with together.
Thank you, Paula. Next up is Rob Bernshteyn, Chairman and CEO of Coupa Software. Where are you, Rob?
Right
there
here.
you are.
Sure. It's pronounced Coupa, actually.
Thank you.
You bet. You bet. So I'll share a little bit of background about the company, because it plays into this trust and transparency topic we're discussing. We're a company that helps organizations manage their business spending. So we help them automate all their processes, from procurement to expense reporting to sourcing to supplier risk. And we support over 1,000 companies now around the world that interact with over 4 million suppliers. So we're running over $1 trillion in spend through our cloud platform now. And that's a lot of data. And what we discovered as we grew over the last 10 years is that with that data and access to that data, we can actually distill some really valuable insights that could be valuable to the individual customers that we serve, based on the collective community and the intelligence distilled from that. So we opened up a concept of opt-in and having our customers share their data in a sanitized, anonymized way, in a normalized way, so we could learn. For example, things like our community is having a problem working with certain suppliers. They're shipping late. They're shipping things that are broken. They're shipping things that are at a higher price point than you could be getting elsewhere. We started to discover ideas around spend fraud. Who are the folks that are over sending you invoices, duplicate invoices, for example? Who are the individuals that are in your company that might be fraudulently logging expense reports? Now, this data is centralized data that is owned by each of the individual 1,000-plus companies. But when centralized in an opt-in way, it's driving actual meaningful impact for individual customers. So what did we learn from this to date? Traditionally, enterprise software is one customer at a time. The one thing we learned is, if you're going to ask your customers for data, if you're going to pull data in, of course it has to be opt-in, of course it has to be clean and sanitized, et cetera. But you also have to offer value back. The idea that in the B2C world, we're collecting a whole host of data and using it and monetizing it without offering a value proposition back to the person from whom you took the data seems silly when you look at it from that perspective. So one is, data is an asset, and it's something that needs to be treasured, and it needs to be something that you establish with your consumers in a win-win situation. And the second lesson really adheres to trust, applies to trust and transparency. It's often discussed in a very serial process that, well, if I trust you, then I'll be transparent with you. I would suggest it also works the other way around. You could begin with transparency. You could begin with openness that then leads to trust. It's simply put, it's the lack of deception that actually creates trust. So the two really work hand in hand, and if managed carefully with an open, listening kind of environment with your customers, employees, all your constituents, there's some really incredible things we could do with all the data that companies like mine and many others here are collecting.
Rob, before you sit, and as a way of sort of provoking conversation among the rest of the room, so Paula talked about the stop sign at a time when stop sign was needed, and how listening is something that companies can institutionalize. I'm having trouble envisioning what lessons we can learn about how, for example, to connect capitalism with pissed off people whose manufacturing centers have been hollowed out by doing a better job of getting enterprise data to enterprise customers in a more transparent fashion. I wonder if you could take a stab at connecting the two for all of us.
Well, I think it begins with the transparency. I mean, it comes back to the transparency. Look, the idea that people are blocking the light of truth, if you will, is a near-term phenomena. If you look at perfect market efficiencies that we see in the stock market, that we see in virtually all businesses that operate at high intensity and high speed, they're operating with complete authenticity, complete transparency. There is no blockage of information. And I think that's an inherent assumption we have to take when we're interacting with our employees, when we're listening and interacting with our customers and all of our constituents. The idea of blocking that in any way is a near-term phenomenon.
Okay, so if we can blow up and scale this notion of using technology to be massively more transparent in multiple parts of our lives and existences, we'll be taking a step forward on being more transparent and therefore trustworthy.
If we manage our way through that in a very authentic way, absolutely.
Great, Rob, thank you so much.
You bet.
Okay, please, yeah, for helping getting the conversation going. And our last discussion leader is Paul Pappas, managing partner, digital strategy for IBM iX with IBM. Paul.
Awesome, thank you, and thank you all. So in the topic of trust and transparency, when we start talking about this, I think it starts with being really clear about what your principles are and what you stand for, and being willing to actually put those down on paper. And last night you heard our chairman, Ginny Rometty, talk about how IBM has done this, particularly for the era of AI. We published our trust and transparency principles, which really talk about, the first principle is that AI is here to augment humans. Second principle is that data is owned by its creator. And the third principle for us is that AI must be open and explainable. So it was really important for us to put those principles down to make sure we had clarity, and that the companies that do business with us, our valued clients, also know exactly where we stand, particularly in these areas related to AI and data specifically. And then we put those principles into action where we launch specific products to address this. So we have a product called Watson OpenScale that allows our clients to get under the hood of our AI capabilities so they could understand how the algorithms are working and how they're reaching the conclusions that they're reaching. But we also, and this came up in our working group discussion earlier today, we have to address kind of bias not just in the algorithms, but in the data itself. And we also launched a toolkit called AI Freedom 360 that allows our clients, again, to get underneath the hood and identify biases in the data that are then being fed into the algorithms that AI is performing its conclusions or making its conclusions on. The second thing, when I think about trust and transparency, a big topic of the conversation that's been going on here, which is tied to it, is inclusion.
Excuse me.
And we've been talking about inclusion at a societal level here, which I think is really fantastic. And it was great to hear the efforts that Ginny talked about last night. She talked about IBM championing programs like P-Tech to make sure that people have access to an accelerated education so they could participate in this new digital economy. And hearing Mark Benioff this morning talk about Salesforce's great program on Trailhead, and hearing from my colleagues from Build On talking about how they've now scaled a program where they're building a new school every 2 days to, again, kind of make sure that from a trust and transparency perspective that people can trust that they have a future. And when we talk about this kind of buildup and the tension that we see building up in the world today, it's that I think a large part of that is people don't trust that they're part of the future, or they have a path or a role or a meaningful part of the future of what's going on. And then lastly, I think as business leaders, we have to take inclusion, then diversity and inclusion, and look inward. When we look at our own organizations, we have to make sure that that same fear that people have externally about not being part of a digital economy, that the people who devote so much of their lives and their efforts and their passion to making us successful and our companies successful, that they also see a future and that we help them with that future. Earlier in the year, we launched a talent transformation business specifically based on the work that we were doing internally to help our own people make sure they're part of the future. And now we offer that as services to our clients to help them transform their HR organizations so they can help their people. And then lastly, in the area of diversity, it was great to hear from the speaker today from Citi talking about diversity, in particular gender diversity and the role that they're playing and the work that they're doing. IBM published a study earlier this year called Women Leadership and the Priority Paradox. And we looked at the issues related to gender diversity, and we surveyed over 2,300 companies globally across 10 different industries. And what we found that even here in 2019, 91% of C-suite positions are held by men. That's the people that report to the people in this room. 91% are men, and 82% of all executive positions are held by men. And it confounded us that why here in 2019 that we haven't made more progress on this. And one of the things we found in the study that over 2/3 of the participants haven't made this a formal business priority. So while everyone here and most business leaders around the world will say diversity and inclusion is something important, it's not something that they've made a formal business priority. So on a personal level, it's something that I have taken a pledge to do more on, and as a leader in my organization, we have a program at IBM called Be Equal. That's why I'm wearing this pin today. It's our Be Equal pin. Part of the pin is making a pledge. So I've made a pledge to drive better diversity and inclusion in our organization, particularly in the area of gender diversity, and I've made it a formal business priority as part of my goals and my team's goals. So, thank you.
Great. Paul, thank you. And so what I'm hearing so far is that one of the first steps in promoting trust and addressing transparency is to acknowledge where that trust doesn't exist and talk about ways of being transparent about that acknowledgement. This conversation is yours. I'm going to go to Justin first. Stand up and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Justin Blake Metalman, and we've been studying trust for almost 20 years. And so I just want to share some of our research with you because I think it'll be good to undergird the discussion, but also I think it justifies, Alan, the very ethos behind what you're doing here and the role of business. So what I want to focus on is the role of business and the role of business leaders. So we look at trust in business, NGOs, government, and media. Trust is near all-time lows, 33,000 respondents, 27 countries. The good, but also in some ways challenging news for business is relative to other institutions, trust in business is relatively high compared to the other institutions, especially historically. But what that means is there are new expectations for businesses. So 76% of respondents say that CEOs should be leading on change. That stat is fairly interesting, much more interesting. 76% say that. That's an 11% jump in 1 year. So think of the massive change in terms of expectations of business leaders. And now I'll also throw something a little bit scarier at you. We've talked a lot about values, this lunch, at every other session we've heard today. There's a real performance gap on values where there's a 14-point gap in terms of CEOs embodying the values of their company. So there's also a little bit of skepticism and belief that business leaders are not fully embodying the values of their corporation, at the same time that expectations of business leaders to lead are growing.
Justin, drill down more deeply in that. You're saying that your survey shows that CEOs do not walk the talk, yes?
The way we ask is that they're not embodying the values of the company, and there's a very high expectation also that they should.
Well, I'll just say it again. With fancier language, you're saying that they're insincere. They're fake. They're being fakers, is what you're saying. I'm asking you why. Why and what should happen next?
Yeah. So Adam, you're actually getting to a great point. So I think like a phrase that's thrown around a lot is authentic leadership, and part of this is making sure that leaders are seen as telling them the truth. So another scary stat is there's a more than 20-point gap in terms of believing that leaders are telling them the truth. And what people are looking for are leaders who are more spontaneous in their speaking style. We ask them questions about like, what type of kind of characteristics do you want out of your leaders? They want someone who's more spontaneous. And they're not looking for, and this is more in terms of the work that we do with CEOs and other executives. The worst thing that can happen when you bring an executive to meet with a group of stakeholders, whether it be employees or media or others, is you'll walk out of the room and you'll ask them like, oh, so how do you think they did? And they're like, well, they seemed really messaged. And the fact is they want people that actually seem like themselves and are authentic, and not people who are purely robotic or message. And they want to hear something about their own personal values as well.
Good. So very broad themes: listen better and speak the truth more. Nathan, I'm going to come to you in a second. I want to hear from one of the authentic leaders that I know in the room is Tom Wilson. Please.
Well, that's a nice introduction. Thank you, Adam. I'm not sure it's true, but
humble.
So I lead Allstate. I'm also chair of the U.S. Chamber, and I want to pose a question about the role of business, because that's what you were talking about. And I believe the role business has 4 jobs. 1 is to take care of our customers, 2 to make profit, 3 to create jobs, and 4 to improve our communities. And if I asked you, how many of you have annual goals on serving your customers? Like everybody does, right? You all got measures, right? How many have annual goals on creating profits, right? Like all of us do, right? It's really important to society that we create profits because that shows we're creating value, we're giving back more than we take from society. And so that's a high art form. Mark's got I don't know, 100,000 people or something working on it, besides all their consulting work. So there's accounting, there's principles, there's regulation around it. If I said to you, how many of you have goals on the number of jobs, net jobs you're going to create this year? A lot fewer hands will go up. If I said, how many board meetings have you been at where your board has said, how much money do we make? All of them, probably. And how many board meetings have you been at when it said, how many jobs did we create? Except if you ask Americans, do you think businesses should make money? Yeah, 82% say yes. If you say, do you think they should create jobs? 94% say yes. So it's at least as valuable as that. So I think as businesses, if we want to be authentic leaders, what I've been talking to our company about, and my board, and Margaret and others, is go on a journey with me to help me figure out how do we measure job creation. Like, I should be held accountable because that's what businesses do. That's what people are accounting for us. I'm not sure exactly how to do it. Do I count the gig economy people? Do I count the people whose businesses spun off from ours, or we give them a contract? I don't really know. But I know that if I'm not measuring it and I don't have a goal for myself, and so I suggest if we want to be authentic and we want people to trust us, we have trust is when people do you do what they want you to do. If we're supposed to create jobs, I think we need to get ourselves organized on having better measurement of jobs and holding ourselves accountable.
Tom, thank you, and especially for the concrete nature of your suggestion. Nathan, over here, please.
Yeah, actually, that's good timing because I want to connect the dots between what Justin said and what Tom said.
Just remind everybody who you are.
Oh, Nathan Rosenberg from Insigniam. I'm a trustee at the Committee for Economic Development and was a contributor to a report we did on saving capitalism. And one of the staggering statistics is in reporting, for every 1 positive article about capitalism, there's 11 negative articles. So the background is not one of opportunity, the background is one of criticism. And one of the proposals I would have is that CEOs should see it as their job. I mean, other than fire, free markets and capitalism is the best invention of humanity. It's created more elevation of the human condition than any religion, any charity ever, or any government really ever has. But we don't tell our story. And we don't talk about the benefits. You know, I sat in that session, Mark, that you guys sponsored. God, you know, businesses are doing as much as public schools are for educating kids. And who tells that story? Nobody. So all of us have a megaphone. Some of you got much bigger megaphones than those of us who run smaller businesses. And we got to get out and tell our story. And this is what capitalism, this is what free markets do for the people of the world.
Nathan, before you sit down, we're a media organization, and we've asked you all to come here, and I think you have some implied criticism of the media, and without the slightest...
It wasn't implied.
No, right. Wonderful. So without any defensiveness, would you just keep going a little bit? What in your view, should the media do better?
Oh, man.
Wasn't implied. I love that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
How big of a soapbox do you want me to get up on? You know, I think people who are trained in journalism have a clear bias, and they go to schools that talk about socialism as a good thing, and I think they bring that bias.
I'm sorry, I asked.
And I think they bring that bias to their jobs. And you know, I live in Southern California. We have the LA Times, and the business section of the LA Times looks like, let me tell you the 20 things wrong with business. I can't think of the last time there was a good article in the LA Times about business. So I'm not talking about Fortune, I'm not talking about the Wall Street Journal. I'm talking about everyday press and, you know, the evening news. So
I asked for it, and I appreciate your perspective. And we can't agree on everything. Who else? Who else? Who would like to either comment or change the subject to some other aspect? Please, Mark. No more media bashing, though.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take up the media bash for 1 second. Okay. I think the problem, I think you're spot on, but the problem is media reports what happens. It doesn't report what doesn't happen. And so all the good things that go on don't get reported. And the investigative journal awards aren't for, they're for undercovering something that's terrible. They're not for talking about what's right. And so I really do think there's an issue there. So anyway, that's not what you called them before. I want to go back to Tom's point. I couldn't agree more with what Tom said. So I run a big firm. It's a lot of accounting. I'm not an accountant. I joined it 4 times, as some people know, so I didn't grow up there. and what we measure is over the last 7 years with data analytics that's now available, and what I call around to our regional managing regions, 27 regions around the world in 157 countries, every year is about our people engagement scores. And we have now correlated with data analytics that the most engaged versus least engaged people, there's a 4 percentage point difference in margin, 8 percentage point different in retention, 8 percentage point different in revenue. For us, every margin is every point of margin is $350 million to the bottom line. It is more important than any financial reports they can give us, because this is predictive of where 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, when we're going to have quality problems, where our people are not engaged. There's a reason for it. You dig into it. And I think, going to the authenticity point, I would just say, most CEOs, and I'm not as good at the financials. I have great executors around me who are wonderful in the operations. A lot of CEOs are really good in the financials, and that's what they talk about. So if you're not talking about people engagement scores, if you're not talking about how many people you're hiring, we hired 100,000 people in the last 6 years. I can tell you all these statistics. I cannot tell you what our business units' profit margins are across the world. But most CEOs are very comfortable in talking about those financial numbers, and I think that's where some of the disconnect comes. Many CEOs aren't as comfortable talking about the softer issues, and you've got to communicate, communicate, communicate. So,
Who else? My perspective is that you and Justin a little bit and Nathan are suggesting that, well, the problems aren't really that bad. We've just done a horrible job of communicating how great things are. Does anybody want to challenge me on that? I mean, a room full of smart people? Or because if Mark and Nathan and Justin, okay, thank you, Paul. Please stand up and introduce yourself.
Hi, Paul Smith from the CFA Institute. I'd just say something from the financial services industry that might throw some, I don't know, an interesting comment out there. The financial services industry is always surveyed by Edelman, and comes just a notch above journalism in terms of its job, but only a small notch. And the thing that always strikes me, we teach ethics and we do a lot of conversations around ethics, and the thing that strikes you more than anything else is that trust, as everybody knows, is not something you can demand from people. You have to earn it. And the way that you earn trust is by putting your client's interests above your own, which is the sort of, that's the definition of professionalism. In fact, if you Wikipedia professionalism, it will tell you that the way a professional behaves, a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, not so much the lawyers perhaps, is to always put your client's interests first. And I think the collapse of trust in the tech industry is because people feel the same sorts of things that they feel about financial services companies. That the client is the mark at the end of the day. It's not the point of what you're doing. And I spend a lot of time talking about that in financial services, that until we can genuinely prove that we care about the wealth creation for our clients, we're not deserving of trust, and we certainly won't build any trust. And I think there's a lesson there for technology.
Who wants to add to that? Please. We'll get you, the mic's coming right. If you turn around, you'll see a mic.
So I may be running the smallest company in this room. So if it's a lesson, I just want to tell her story a bit, and maybe...
I'm sorry, just introduce yourself.
I'm James Rhee. I'm an investor. I've been in private equity for a long time. I have my own firm. And for the last 6 years, I've been running a business called Ashley Stewart. And it's a pretty stark example of some of the things you were talking about. So private equity is the least trusted person in the industry. Maybe that's pretty deserved. So 6 years ago, there was a business that I was on the board of, and I'm a former high school teacher as well, right? And it is a business called Ashley Stewart, and I just want to make sure you hear that name. It is arguably one of the largest and oldest in revenue terms brands for black women in the history of this country. And I don't have to tell you about the metaphor about being underrepresented in capitalism and voice in this room. It was about to go away, very quietly, liquidated, gone, no press. There would have been no press. And so I shut down my life in Boston. And I wrote about this in the Harvard Business Review, and Carla Harris and I are on a podcast together. It's about trust, transparency, and transformation. That's what it's called. And this approach, if it's helpful to you, it's worth me speaking about this. I stood up there, and I'm clearly not the customer. I had no experience in retail. And I said to everyone, I said, I'm scared. My name is James. I don't know what I'm doing. I love what this brand stands for, because it existed without any money, without technology, no computers, no Wi-Fi, 2013, for a reason, and it was a safe place. It's one of the few places that black women in local neighborhoods could go and feel comfortable. And I said that it reminded me of my mother as an immigrant, and that I often stood up for my mother growing up. And I said that these type of places were worth fighting for. And I said that we would operate on math and kindness. That's it. And we established a bond right there, and armor was down, and I said, I need your help. And so for 6 months, that's how we operated, and the whole system tried to kill this company for 6 months. It's a part of the grid that I didn't grow up in, but I became a master of this grid, and I watched it in reverse and saying, you're trying to kill this company, and I won't let you do it. And no one helped. The only people who helped were the employees of the company and the customers. And they knew, they said, this crazy person came down, and he doesn't talk, he's just doing it. And he's living through math and kindness. And I was commuting from Boston to Secaucus, and I got made fun of by a lot of our friends saying, what the hell are you doing? And in the end of the day, no one helped, and I called in some chits, and I got some money. I couldn't get insurance, and I called in a lot of favors. And for the last 6 months, it's become a platform of change. We register women to vote. We now sit on the board of JP Morgan's Advancing Black Pathways Board, National Retail Federation. This woman has a voice at the highest levels of every industry at this point through this company. And so our goal, I have no ambitions for this company to be Walmart, Target, or anything. We're never going to be that. It's just not feasible at this point. But we're measuring our impact on influence, broadly speaking. Even like right now, you're hearing her story. And for anyone who says, oh, that's okay, but I want you to know that my shareholders made, it's the best exit of any consumer retail business in the last 4 years. And so everyone benefited, but most importantly, the underlying demographic which we serve, she's being held in very high regard in some very high places right now. So those are some things that I can tell you what we did and what I did and vulnerability or anything like that, but it's, you need buy-in and you need help. There are a lot of people hurting right now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. We're almost out of time. I want to suggest one last line of inquiry. I think we've had some really interesting conversations around trust, a little bit on transparency. One thing we're missing, and I'm going to look for a willing victim among the publicly traded CEOs in the room. I feel like we've set up a system where there's a lot of transparency for businesses. Businesses have to report their quarterly earnings. They have to make various other kinds of regulatory filings. The compensation of the CEOs in the room is reported publicly, including in comparison with their average employees. I sense from CEOs I talk to that they think there's too much damn transparency. And I wonder if somebody would address that. Is that, am I oversimplifying? Are we not being transparent in the right ways? We're trying to solve a problem here. Who can help? Can I beg you as an ex-CEO? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. Go ahead. We'd love to hear Tim. You have a very valuable perspective, and then we'll close with Ron.
I don't think it's a transparency issue. I think it's a values issue. I think it's a corporate values issue. It's a societal values issue. And, you know, I spend now most of my time outside the country, and, you know, most of the places where I'm comfortable investing, their businesses have a sense of broader responsibility. Many years ago, I invested in a bank in Japan. Part of the reason we were successful there is because we quickly adopted the sort of Japanese stakeholder model. So I don't think it's not Dodd-Frank, it's not better accounting, it's not, you know, earnings forecasts or any of the above. It's that the customers, the employees, the suppliers, you know, all the constituencies believe that the system is broken, that government has been captured by money and corporate power, and that there's not enough evidence. There are lots of great, you know, people here who are outside the norm, but the norm, as perceived by, you know, my cousins in Kentucky and my brother in Michigan and so forth, and the way we got Donald Trump is because people don't believe that the powerful institutions, corporate, governmental, even educational, are looking out for their best interests. And I think the problem is it's not a perception, it's a reality.
And since you so perfectly gave a synopsis of the problem, I mean, I know you can't give a solution in a short.
I probably will.
Okay, in a short amount of time. But what is the beginning, Tim, of the solution?
I think the beginning is sadly, it's a political. You know, it's got to that narrative has to, you know, as flawed as the system is. As hijacked as it is, I mean, I think there's probably a good thing that will come out of having 23 Democrats run, because there'll be a variety of voices, and some of them, as Donald Trump did, will resonate with the deep wisdom and anger of the American people, and you know that could start as it always does. I mean, it always comes from, you know, some corner, whether it's from academic world or in, you know, entrepreneurs that change things, or, you know, the political sphere. I mean, you know, Franklin Roosevelt changed the way we thought about our responsibilities and our rights and benefits. So I sadly think that's the only likely thing. I think the media is reactive, and so it's going to have to be somebody that breaks through the noise. And, you know, I used to think it was going to come from, you know, religious leaders, and I gave that up. So.
Thank you so much. And now, Ron Williams, on behalf of everybody, I'm extremely grateful that you're going to close our session by sharing your wisdom with us.
Okay, well, I don't know about the wisdom part, but I'll close it. Just a couple of points. One, I want to come back to this transparency question, because one of the things that I think we as business executives don't do is create a level of business literacy among our employees. We say people don't understand capitalism, but how much energy do we expend explaining to them how we make money, who our customers are, where the money goes, and how we are, in fact, an engine for the greatest transformation of society that the world has ever seen. Now, we don't spend nearly enough time doing that, and I can tell you there are tools and capabilities that can be extremely helpful in doing that. To come back to the question I was asked about executive compensation, you know, CEOs make both too much and too little, and it depends on who's doing the counting. The answer is, if shareholders are doing well, the company's doing well, and the CEO is compensated in proportion to the value that's being created, pay them whatever you think they're worth. If you're working on the line every day or driving a bus, there is no amount of explanation that explains why one person is worth $1 million, let alone 10 million, 50 million, 100 million. But I think what we have to do is really work to create jobs, create opportunity, give people context on how the businesses are really doing our job to make America and the planet a better place. So I think we can count on CEO pay being a topic today, tomorrow, and in the future. And my advice would be get over it and get used to it.
Ron, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you. It's been a very interesting well, it's been a very interesting conversation among a big group of people. I'm just going to tick off some of the things that we talked about around trust and transparency. We need to listen better. We need to make data transparent. We need to be truthful. There's a shocker. We need to create jobs and set goals around those creating jobs transparently. We need to tell our story better, whether or not the media will do it for you and for us. We need to acknowledge the problems that exist. And similarly to telling the story, we need to explain better the context of capitalism. This obviously isn't the end of the conversation about trust and transparency, but thank you for having it with us.